You're listening to Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content and to join our book club, please join us on Patreon. Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. Welcome to the Storytime in Paris podcast on Paris Underground Radio, where we keep that tradition alive by showcasing an author with a French connection in each episode. Every episode will feature 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. Would you like to join the Storytime in Paris book club? Head on over to patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio and stay tuned to the end of this episode for more information. Welcome to the season finale of Season 4 of Storytime in Paris. I have a very special guest for you. Jamie Beck is a world-renowned photographer whose photographs are almost an extension of herself. Her list of credits is long and impressive, and speckled with world-famous brands like Chanel, Donna Karan, Nike, Oscar de la Renta, Netflix, Disney, Google, Samsung, Microsoft, Vogue, and Harper's Bazaar, to name but a few. Among her many accolades, Jamie has twice been named as one of the industry's top 100 creatives by Adweek magazine. And yet, one year, she decided to give it all up, to move by herself to a remote village in Provence and see what could happen. The result was life-changing. Jamie's book, An American in Provence, is a beautiful memoir of that first year, combining personal revelations, recipes she loved, photographic tips, and her own stunning photography. And, as of the very morning we spoke, it is also a New York Times bestseller. Please allow me to introduce the illustrious Jamie Beck, author of An American in Provence. Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's such a pleasure.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. As of today, I am a New York Times bestselling author of An American in Provence.
Congratulations.
Thank you. A book that I had no idea when I moved to France 6 years ago I would end up photographing and writing. It's all happened very organically. But before any of that, I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer since I was a child, and it is what I do, and it is the essence of the book as well.
Fabulous. So usually I ask people their connection to France, but it actually also helps with the next question, which is, what is your book about? So can you tell us what your connection to France is and what your book is about?
Sure. So I'm an American, and I was living in New York City, and I had a commercial photography studio, and I would come to France for shoots quite often throughout the years. And one time I was on an airplane that hit bad turbulence, and I thought it was going to crash. And my dying thought was, great, now I'll never know what it's like to live in France. And I heard myself say that, and I thought, if that's my dying wish, not you're never going to have kids, you're never going to see your parents, that's probably something I should go and do. So I made a promise to myself, if the plane lands, if I survive this, I'm going to move to France for a year. And just like that, like a switch, it was so clear what I needed to do. I stopped my life, I stopped my business, everything. And a month later, I had a visa and I moved to France. And being a New Yorker, I didn't want to move to Paris. And I had a lot of experience in Paris because I came for work so much, because it'd be the same life I had in New York. It's a city life, even if it was a French cultured city life. I had gone to Provence twice for different jobs, and I had fallen in love with the landscape. You know, I opened the shutters my first morning in Provence at sunrise, and it's the blue misty mountains and the sunflower fields and the lavender fields and the vineyards below. And I'm in an ancient village. It's like a storybook. And I just couldn't believe this kind of magic was actually real. And it haunted me. So I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to live a year in France to know what this is like, I'm going to do it in Provence. And as a photographer, it is, an endless bounty of beauty down here. So that's how I ended up in France. That's my connection to France. I had no idea when I arrived that it would last longer than a year, that I would have a book, that I would have a baby, any of it. I just showed up with a suitcase and life started.
Had you thought about moving to France before? Was it something that you knew was in your head, or was it just completely a surprise?
I would say it's completely a surprise. I mean, when I was a child, I thought I'd fantasized about Paris, but I never actually thought about, because I didn't know the language, and it's so far from where I come from in the United States. I grew up in Texas. That was too much of a dream to dream something like that, which is how I ended up in New York City. So I would say that it was probably always in the back of my head, but until the clarity, I didn't actually believe it was something that I could do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you, speaking of your visa, reading about your experience with the visa.
Oh my God.
It
is.
I felt like, normally I don't like to read those parts because they're too close to home, but the language that you were using is exactly the same language that I would use when I'm describing it. Like there's no way to do this. You just have to bring them all of your paperwork.
All of it. I mean, I have this binder that is gigantic. It has every single document you could ever imagine having. And I call it the Bible. And I literally now, when I go in there, I just like plop it down on the desk and I'm like, let's go, let's do this. What do you want?
Me too. I was like, I'm not leaving. When I went to renew my visa the first time, I was like, I'm not leaving. So here are 300 pages. I know you're going to find something I don't have, but here is at least a tome so you know that I am serious.
Right, exactly. I do think that post-pandemic visa process has changed though, because the last time we just did it, it was all a submission online.
Oh.
So it was not, it was different now. They can't just kind of be like, well, where's this paper and where's that paper? They have to, you submit very specific.
Oh my God, that's so civilized.
It's so civilized. Yeah. It's not like up to the whim and emotion of the person who's interviewing you. So that was like a nice change.
Oh, well, I don't want to take us too far down the visa road. That's definitely a topic I could go on and on about.
The hellacious torture of the visa.
Let's talk about nice things, beautiful things.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first photograph that you ever took?
Yes, absolutely. So I was about 12, 13, and my mother gave me her old film camera. It's a 35 millimeter Pentax camera. I still have it. I still shoot with it. And I remember the first time I looked through the viewfinder, and it was as if everything that was trapped in my head, I could see through that lens. It's like I could see the world through that lens. It opened up every possibility. And it was magic, and it's still magic to me. And I took my best friend, I'm back in Texas here. I took my best friend and I put her in a ball gown that I bought at a Goodwill and took her in the backyard, like did her hair and makeup. And I did a photo shoot with her in the backyard in this big puffy white dress. And I rode my bicycle down to the local drugstore, Walgreens, that had 1 hour processing back in that era of film. And I got the film back and I was like, this is so Vogue. This is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I was like, done. So it's just this, it's this 13-year-old girl in the backyard of my parents' house in a big puffy, ridiculous dress with like way too much makeup on. It's the first photograph I ever took. But it just set me on a path which has defined my entire existence and life and career.
It's incredible that your first photograph was like this fully realized fashion shoot and not like, here's my mom's blurry face.
No, I know. But so the thing is that it's how I saw the world before. I loved fashion and I loved movies and I loved storytelling. I loved all these things as a kid. But I had no way to touch it until I held a camera. Mm-hmm. So photography has always been about creation to me, about what I could create, never about I was never interested in journalism. I don't want to point a camera at something that's happening before me. I want to make something with the camera. It's always been like a dance. So that's exactly the first step I took with the camera is still literally to this day how I work with a camera.
Amazing. And do you find that living in Provence, that the way you photograph has changed?
Absolutely. So Provence is a character in my work. The light is a character in my work. And the light in Provence, I think, is the most beautiful light in the world. So when I came from New York, I came from a commercial photography background in New York City. So a lot of the work I did there, I was using strobes or continuous lighting, but you have to light stuff because there's just not a lot of light in New York City. The days are short, the buildings are in the way, everything's dark, you're inside. So I was working with a lot of equipment and I always hated that, but I had no choice. And when I came to Provence, I got rid of everything and it was just a camera and the light and the day. And that became a defining aspect of my work. So that changed a lot. And it changed in a way that I had always longed to work as a photographer. So it was really it felt like I was coming back home to the roots of my photography when I arrived to Provence. Again, none of it was planned. It just kind of organically unfolded that way.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really loved reading about your tips for lighting.
Yeah.
They're so
how to work with natural light. I mean, because the thing is, because I was a commercial photographer, I know I've been trained in how to do all the technical aspects of photography. I don't talk about it that much because I don't find it that interesting personally. Like photography to me is mental and emotional. It's like your head and your heart. And when you talk about equipment, it's just, it's like so unemotional. But I know I'm trained in how to in how to do stuff correctly. If you're photographing a woman, it's more flattering if you have a bounce. And how do you do a bounce? Use a silver card or, these kind of tricks. And when I didn't have anything here, I could just kind of look around and figure out, well, I know I want a reflector for this, so I'll use the lid of a stock pot, a silver stock pot, or I'll take the mirror from the bathroom and I'll put it on the floor. Just kind of finding little ways to kind of to do the technical things I wanted to do without any of the equipment, just by what was around. And I still use my body as you would call it a black flag in a studio, which is just a opaque piece of fabric on a stand, and to create shadows. And most of the time I just use my body as like a black flag, create shadows. It's really simple,
Makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, so in the book, I do there's 11 photography tutorials from how I do the still lifes and the kind of techniques and tools that I find really useful for still lives, and how to work with natural lighting, how to photograph out in nature, how to photograph children, which is like a whole other thing. So I kind of walk through a lot of basic things that people ask me about, even how to pose, which is something, and I talk about this in the book, is, there's models who are photogenic people, but anyone can take a great photograph of themselves. And the difference is you just have to learn how to pose. And so I talk about how to do that and how to become an interesting subject matter, either for yourself or for another photographer or artist who's working with you.
I loved that too, because I always feel like I'm missing a trick. I have no idea how, I have no idea how to take a good photo of myself.
It's practice and it's angles. Like you can't just sit there. Like the way I'm just sitting here right now it's not a great photograph, but you have to make shapes and move the eye. It's like when you see in art class, those figurines, those wooden figurines of the body and all the different joints. You don't just leave it there on a stand, you put it in a shape. So you have to do that with your body in order to make an interesting pose for an interesting photograph. Anyone can do it. We all have arms and legs and heads, it's literally just practice. And then eventually you learn what works best for your body and the message that you want to convey about who you are. Because what you're doing is you're telling your story visually.
Do you have a favorite subject to photograph?
Well, right now it changes throughout time, but right now I'm absolutely in love with photographing roses.
Oh,
I'm obsessed with it. And obviously they're beautiful flowers, but they, in Provence, it's just, they're magical. They smell, each one smells different. The textures are different. The amount of petals are different. The shape is different. And they just, for me, they represent life, because you look at a rose bush and you'll see the buds, you'll see the new growth, and then you'll see perfectly prime of life roses blooming. And then you'll see the ones that are dying, and they're all so beautiful and just represents our existence. And I find them wonderful, absolutely delightful to photograph. So that's my favorite subject matter right now.
I love that.
I'm always rose hunting.
Curious about what's going on in Paris right now? My second podcast, Don't Miss This, takes you beyond the typical and the obvious with a weekly roundup of the best of what's happening in Paris each week. Never wonder what you're missing out on again. Listen now to Don't Miss This on parisundergroundradio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So in writing this book, what was your writing process like? Did you find that it was did you find yourself doing the same sorts of things that you do when you're photographing, or was it completely different?
The only aspect to my writing that's similar to my photography is that I have to do it alone. So when I make a photograph, I go into my studio or go outside and I'm by myself and I'm having a very emotional internal dialogue with myself. And I will get actually like really frustrated if somebody interrupts that conversation because I'm engaging with a subject matter, an idea, a story that I'm trying to tell. So I have to do it alone. Otherwise, it's somebody else's energy that's in someone else's language that is implementing itself into your work. And I can't, it's like noise to me and I can't do it. So when I write, I have to be by myself because it's the same, I'm speaking internally, right? But the difference is when I'm in the studio or outside, I listen to like a playlist of like classical music that I listen to because it helps me like breathe and feel the emotion of the moment. But when I write, it has to be dead silent. So I wrote the entire book on the top floor of my building as far away from any human and anything as possible. And there's like a window that looks out over the mountain. So it's just, and I live in a small village. There's no car sounds because it's, not cars can't come in except for one street. So it's like dead quiet. There's a view of a mountain. You can't see anything. I'm up here on my perch. And then I put on noise canceling headphones on top of that.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like I go into this sort of like those like what they call those soundless chambers, It's like there's like
a sensory deprivation.
Yeah, I go into like that in order to write. And when I recorded the audiobook, it was wonderful because you have to do it by yourself. And they put you in a room that's like 2 rooms deep of doors into where it's that kind of silence. And I was like, this is amazing. Like I need this in my home in order to write. It's just this void of noise room. So I would do that and I can't write quickly in short spurts. I have to sit down and it has to be like the entire day. And I don't get up to eat. I don't do anything. I just stay still in silence and I write. So to write this book, and it's like painful, actually like emotionally painful. Just thinking about that process again, like my stomach is in knots. So to write the book took me an entire year of just like 8 hours a day, just sitting in silence, in torture.
Wow.
Yeah. 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 I mean, even just to write an Instagram caption, like I have to go stand in the shower and, like just let the words kind of come to me. No one can talk to me. And it's like for 2 sentences, And people are like, oh, you're such a great writer. And I'm like, it's painful. It's like this Instagram caption took me like an hour and a half to come up with. Oh,
that's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a story that you tell in your book that I found so touching. I choked up when I read it. And it's not, you don't present it in a way where it's like, look at this charming, touching thing that happened to me. But you talk about how you didn't really speak any French and you're trying to order like food, going to the market. And you're talking to, I think it's the cheesemonger, and he's teaching you like plus and moins, like more or less.
Right.
And I found it so incredibly touching that he was like, here, let me communicate my language with you. Like, here are the basic tools that you need so we can have a relationship.
Right. I mean, it's really beautiful to experience as an adult what it's like for a child to learn language, because that's literally how they taught me, is just showing me, like Clément, my cheesemonger. He's like, I know I didn't go away. Like after a month of showing up at the market without any French, he's like, all right, you're not going away. I'm going to teach you how to communicate with me, like a child, and like really slowly showing me how to order more or less cheese. And there's also a man I went to, a épicerie verte, who is like a little greengrocer in my village. And same thing, after enough times coming through there, he opened the cash register and he took out a handful of coins and he counted numbers for me and showed me and counted the numbers really slowly and had me repeat after him. And it's just this like beautiful human connection, like I'm going to give you a piece of my language, my culture, my world, and I'm receptive and thankful for the help. And it's very, it's humbling to put yourself in that experience. It's frustrating. And then it gives you these really beautiful gifts though.
I loved that. How have the locals reacted to you? Like, do you have friends in the neighborhood now?
Yes. So after, everyone knows that French people are not the most welcoming or warm. And so I knew that coming in. And so I was, I thought, I'm not going to put myself out there. I'm just going to be a silent observer of their world. That's all I was going to ask for. She's like, let me come be in your world and watch you. And I'm not going to ask anything in return. And eventually I didn't go away. And so they became curious about me. And for months, most people only spoke French to me, which is great. And then eventually they were like, who are you? Like, why are you here? 'Cause I live in like a very working class village. It's not like a village where there's a lot of like expats or tourists or anything. It's where French people live and work. And they're just kind of like, why are you here? And I'm like, well, number one, I'm like, you're speaking English to me finally for the first time, even though I don't speak French and you could have done this months ago and helped me out. And so I explained to them where I'm from and what I do. And I lived in New York for 13 years. And I found out that if you tell a French person you're from the United States, they could really care less. If you tell a French person you're from New York, they like you a lot more. They're a lot nicer too. Because French people love New York City. So I'm like, okay, so just tell people I'm from New York. And then they're like, and then they start talking to me. So eventually I didn't ask for anything and didn't tell them that much about what I was doing. But eventually they found out that I had an Instagram and I was a photographer. And so they started following along. And now everyone knows who I am in my village. But what was very cool about it is when the COVID lockdowns in France happened, everyone in my village knows I'm a photographer and that I was making these. I did a project called Isolation Creation where I made a photograph every single day. And I shared the process of creating that photograph. And they started bringing me flowers from their garden and leaving them on the doorstep. Or saving bugs for me, because I use it in my still life work. I use bugs. And so finding dead bugs is really valuable and important to me to be able to place them in my still lifes. And they started bringing me all these things and leaving them. And it was just this incredible community experience that it was totally unexpected and beautiful. So now I've just sort of folded into the community. This is the role I play in the community. And I'm a storyteller. People invite me to their farms and they invite me to their homes to show me projects so I can tell their stories through Instagram and through my photographs and things like that. It's just a delight, absolutely a delight. So eventually I've made friends slowly. Slowly. And of course, as an American, you find other Americans because you have such a shared experience. Typically, I find if I run into an American, we have a lot in common because we're both here. We're drawn to the same things. And we have a lot of the same experiences with France and what that's like as an expat. So it's very easy to make friends when you find an American. And then typically that American's married to a French person. And so I've been able to navigate into French relationships that way. And that's been very, very enriching, which I write about in the book. Some of these French families that I've come into their worlds and they've invited me to their table and they've taught me so many lessons about not only the culture of France, but about life.
We have a lot in common. I also tell people that I'm New Yorkaise instead of telling people I'm an American because
they're a lot nicer to you when you say that.
They're like, oh, New York, wow. Yeah. Whereas
Exactly.
if you tell people you're in America, they're like, oh, you like Trump. And you're like, no.
I know. Yeah, they really they don't care less about Americans. Yeah.
And we have a similar story in that I just sort of picked up and moved here too. I didn't really know anybody. It was just me, my suitcase, and my dog. And I spent a lot of time. I didn't think I would make any friends. My plan was just to come here and write.
Right.
But I really found myself trying to assimilate, trying to learn what the French culture was like. What does it mean to really live here? Really embracing it much in the same way that you do, it seems from what you're saying and from your book. So when you return to the US now, what surprises you?
The United States culture is more shocking to me than the French culture. The French culture, obviously, I'm drawn to France for so many different reasons. And I think a lot of it has to do with fundamentally, I think, and behave more like a French person in my natural being. even when I lived in the United States, than I do as an American. Like, just kind of their approach to life is much more what I am like as a human individually. So when I go back to the United States, I have culture shock. I mean, it's like everything is so big, everything is so loud, the cars are so fast, the food is so big. It's like, and you eat so fast, and it's very much focused on like celebrity and money and having, and which I find, like, for me personally, it to be very toxic. And in France, I think it's much more focused around an intellectual conversation about culture, music, art, these sort of things. And it's just a slower way of life. And in America, it's just like, wow, I just kind of feel like I'm at a 24-hour party when I go back to the United States. I'm like, I come back to France like 10 pounds heavier and exhausted. You know? It's like, oh my God, that was so much. It's a whirlwind. I mean, it's fun. It's like, it's a lot of energy. And America, you know, there are real frustrations with France. Like, getting anything done is impossible. And in America, it's like, yes, and how quickly do you want it? And I appreciate that. And you can make anything happen in the United States. You can do anything. It's the entrepreneurship is incredible. And in France, it's everything's a no. Everything, it's not possible. You know, it takes years to get something done or built or to get someone to show up. It's like, oh my God, how does anything ever get done? But then again, you know, everyone has less stress and more pleasant lives because of it.
Yeah. I second everything you just said.
See, that's what I say. When you find an American living in France, you have you kind of think the same, and you like the same things, and you're here for the same reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Similar experiences.
Exactly.
So one of the things you talk about, I guess, like your theme in your book, is how you were able to really strip down to the essentials and discover who you really are, what really matters to you without all that noise.
Right.
Have you been able to maintain that sense of knowing? And what do you do when you feel it slipping away?
Right. So when I write this essay, and this was something, so what people don't know is when I came to France, I had no idea I was going to make a book. And what happened, it was only supposed to be for a year, but when the year ended, I was just beginning this journey. And all these things, I had no idea what happened, which was, I didn't only come to answer the question, what is it like to live in France? But what France started to change me by showing me what my culture had scripted on me. And so I started asking questions like, well, why do I wear makeup? And why do I paint my nails? And, you know, why do I behave this way or that way? Why do I think this way or that way? And I realized I was just taught that in a cultural way, not because it's who I am as a human being. So it showed me these contrasts, and it doesn't mean I turned into a French person. It just means it was shown to me. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to stop and find out what I really like and who I really am. I don't have to be American and I don't have to be French, but I can find out at the core, who am I? So it started to show me all of these things about how much is nature versus nurture, how much is culture, you know, versus self. And I studied that. And it's a lot of self-portraiture work I did, was looking at that, looking at myself changing and trying to understand it. And it's one of the reasons why I started doing self-portraits. It was literally just a study of self. So the thing about where I eventually got, and I write about in the book, of discovering, of stripping everything away and seeing what my core was, is that it's very hard to maintain that this like past year when you become so busy with work. So I'm doing this book, and my publisher is an American. So I'm in the American culture again, even though I'm living in France. And it's very difficult to maintain that sort of harmonious balance. And it's, for me, it's unhealthy. So, you know, my husband and I have a lot of conversations about when this is all finished, you know, I need to stop. I have to step away. I'm on the American treadmill that goes, a machine that goes really fast and is really loud and is 24 hours a day. And it's not healthy. And I'm not in that place that I was when I wrote the book. And when I ended up writing the book, it came after all of these organic experiences. And I was writing in my journal about all of these things that were happening and changing. And I was photographing all these things just because I'm a creator and I have to create and I have to tell stories. And it wasn't for a book at that time. It was just for my life, for me. And I shared a lot of that on social media and the journey with people. And so it eventually, when the book came about, I had to go back and write out what I had learned. And they asked me to do a book after I was in France for a couple of years. And I said, I mean, yeah, maybe one day, but like I was still in it. I was like, I still don't really know what this all means and I need more time. So it was not for a couple of years later that I felt like, okay, I finally can speak to these things. And now I understand and now I can write this out. So it happened sort of retrospectively. And I had to go back through years of photographs in France and try to find the right pieces that tell the right story of everything I had learned. So to answer your question, I'm not in the place I was and what I write about in the book. And I say this all the time to my managers and my agents and my husband. I'm not living the life that I write about in the book. And next year I have to go back to that because that's a healthy place for me to be. I have to have nothing to do in order to be creative, in order to create, to blossom, to grow. Like I feel like every day I get up and it's work and it's meetings and the pictures I'm taking are for all these other purposes, and I really just need to go back to there being no purpose because that's where I make the good stuff. So you really have to, just because you know something, it doesn't mean that it makes it finite and forever. You have to protect it. And I'm in a place that I know this and I need to fight to go back to that place.
It's wonderful that you're so self-aware.
Yeah. Well, that's what like living in silence for years will teach you. Like I work by myself and so I feel and I process through a lot of things. So I understand.
Are you searching for spiritual guidance? The Heart of You podcast is an exploration into your soul through intuition, spirituality, divination, and unconditional love. Host Annette DeLu is a spiritual guidance coach, intuitive, Akashic, and tarot reader who discusses practical ways to integrate spiritual growth into your everyday life. Listen now to The Heart of You on ParisUndergroundRadio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So I have one last question for you, a bonus question. What's on the menu for tonight?
To eat?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so funny because I cook most of our meals. And, I say France produces the best ingredients in the world, hands down. And I am very fortunate to live in this village where we have multiple farm stands and a fromagerie and a boulangerie and all that, and butcher shops and stuff. So I walk out my door and I have the best food in the world and I can make anything, really. It's wonderful. But tonight, because we just found out that I'm a New York Times bestseller, we're going out to celebrate. We're going to go out to eat, which is kind of rare. So it's not the best answer, but
it's actually a fabulous answer.
We're going to go out and eat.
Being on the New York Times bestseller list is a pretty strong answer.
Huge. I would never even dare to dream something like that. So it's just a huge life moment. So we're going to go celebrate at a restaurant.
So what's next for you? Do you think you'll be coerced into writing another book?
Well, one of the reasons why this year was so busy was not just publishing the book and all of the fanfare it takes to get a book out there and get press and release it to the world. But I have another project that I can't talk about yet, but that was literally due 2 weeks before the first book came out. And I'm still in the process of finishing that one up. I'm very excited about. So that's been keeping me very busy. It's like I have 2 full-time jobs right now. So next year, I'm trying to clean the slate so I can have nothing to do, so I can go back into my studio and just make the art that brought us here talking today.
All right. So where can people find you and how can they keep up to date with what's going on and whatever this new fabulous project will be?
Well, I put everything on my Instagram, which is jamiebeck.co. And that's kind of where I make all of my announcements. And when I'm back in the studio and creating art, I always storytell how each piece is made in the day. It takes me one whole day to make one photograph, and I share that journey from start to finish. So that's all goes through Instagram. And then on my website, I sell posters and prints and stationery and paperweights and whatever crazy fun thing I come up with. We put those up for sale. So I try to work with a lot of artisans in France and create special projects. And I have some really cool ones in the works for next year from my village that I'm really excited about. And everything's, we're small. It's just my husband and I. We're a very small team. We're a very small business. So we don't mass produce anything. We can't do that. So everything's just this really lovely little artifact of life and of Provence. And so we put those things up there. And I started a new project this year, they're called studio artifacts, which are old SX70 Polaroids. So when I create a still life in the studio, at the end, I'll just shoot a Polaroid of it, which is wonderful because my work, there's a lot of post-production. There's a lot of building, like removing pins and painting scenes. And it's a lot. Like every photograph is made of like minimum 3 images and up to like 21 images. Wow. It's insane. So really heavy lift in the post-production. But what's so amazing about the Polaroid is I can't do anything with it. Like it literally is what it is. It's in frame. So it's this fun contrast and they're one of a kind. So I started making those. Okay, and I had like a whole drawer full of them. And I was like, well, maybe people would be interested to own these. And so I went and found a local framer in the nearby village, and she framed them really simply. And I think I don't remember how many we launched with, but we sold out in a few hours. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. So I'll continue to do those in batches. We're going to have a new batch for holiday. Then next year I'll do more. And they're really fun. And I've been working on this project with a model, actress, French girl, Muse, that I've known for years down in Provence. And we've been doing a project where I photograph her just every year with the camera in my studio, really simply. Like sometimes she's nude, sometimes she's just in like a simple shimsy, sometimes she's with a flower or with a piece of fruit, just whatever the day brings. So I've been working with her only on Polaroid and in black and white. And it's this like lovely collection of photographs. So we might put that together into an art book next year. And we call it Pieces of Louise. And I would like to, once I get into a quiet space in my head again, I would like to write passages about the female experience to go along with those photographs. So I say I'm not going to be busy next year, but now it's already filling up. I like making things. I can't help myself.
That all sounds amazing, really.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was really wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I hope that a lot of expats or Americans in France will discover and follow and reach out to me on Instagram because, like you said, we have a lot in common.
Thank you again to Jamie Beck for such a wonderful conversation and for being the perfect Season 4 finale guest. You can find Jamie on her website at jamiebeck.co and on Instagram at jamiebeck.co. And thank you to you for listening. I've loved this season. If you've loved it too, please subscribe so you won't miss the next episode when we're back again in January. Please also tell a friend. The more people who know about this podcast, the more we'll be able to grow, and the more I'll be able to share fabulous books and their authors with you. To keep up with Storytime in Paris during the break, join the Storytime Book Club, which welcomes authors who have been featured on the podcast to come talk more in depth about their books. Since we keep the podcast spoiler-free, this is the perfect chance to get all your specific questions answered. Please visit patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio for more information. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. You can find me on all socials at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria, and on my website, jennyphoria.com. Thank you for listening, and until next season, happy reading! This episode of Storytime in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.